Mark, welcome.
Thank you. Great to meet you.
Great to meet you too. Excited to talk to you today. So I want to start this interview with a story that you probably don't tell too often, but I want to hear about the time when you were 14 years old and your dad actually fired you from working with him at his auto repair shop.
Yep. So my dad was actually a pattern maker. So he built patterns for machines that would get casted in a foundry and then put into production after they went through a tool and die process. So it was it's a part of the auto manufacturing process that most people don't understand. And it's funny, my dad was a pattern maker. His brother was an engineer, which is where the drawings from the pattern for the pattern maker would come from. And then my brother, Peter, was a tool and die guy who took the castings from the foundry, machined them, and then put them into production in auto plants. So I went to work for my dad at 13, and I was in high school, and our school was overcrowded on the east side of Detroit, and we had half-day sessions. So I had 802 students in my class, my ninth grade class. And so I would get on the bus across the street, ride probably 3.5, 4 miles down the road to Shaner Avenue, walk up down Shaner Avenue to my dad's shop. And I'd work at the shop, and I started out first with glorious things like cleaning bathrooms, washing floors, cutting the lawn, painting fences, and then slowly graduated into what would be sort of early apprentice kind of work, working on patterns and that sort of stuff. But while I was a sweeper and a maintenance guy in this plant, my dad was the foreman; he wasn't the owner. There was this other guy named Jerry who I hung around with, and Jerry was a cool guy, and he was many ages he was 10 years older than I was, so he's 23. And Jerry sort of moved slowly. So I was always working circles around Jerry. And one day we were sitting out back. I was 14 at the time then, and I was having a cigarette with him. And he let loose that he was making $4.25 an hour. And I was making $1.25. And so I went to my dad and said, "Hey, Dad, I'm working circles around Jerry. And he's getting $4.25 an hour. Why aren't I getting $4.25 an hour? I want a raise." And he said, "Well, what are you going to do if I don't give you a raise?" So I'm going to quit. He says, "Really? So you're going to quit? Do you have another job?" I said, "No." He goes, "Well, then you're fired, stupid. Go home. Get on the bus." And so I went home. And, I was the oldest of six. There were 6 of us in 7 years, 8 of us around the dinner table, big trestle table with benches on either side. And I sat to my dad's right-hand side. I was the oldest. And after dinner, we would pass around the towel. My dad would give his version of current events, which was always a bit skewed, to somehow teach all of us a lesson of some sort. And after that conversation was done, everybody left the table. And he said, "You stay here." I said, "Okay." And he goes, "Let me tell you about Jerry. Jerry's a great guy. He's got a family. He's paying rent. He's got a young child. And Jerry's about at the pinnacle of what he's going to do for the rest of his life. Jerry's not going to go much further than he is because he doesn't have the abilities to do it. And so I'm helping support Jerry's family. That's why I'm paying $4.25 an hour. Do you understand what that means?" I said, "Yes." He goes, "Well, then, okay, so you understand that you're not supporting a family. You're not paying rent. And, the money, goes to help pay some of the things we'd otherwise have to pay for a year at home. But, you're earning a wage at 14 years old." He said, "Yeah." And he goes, "So do you want your job back?" And I said, "Sure." And he said, "Great, you're going to get $1 an hour now." So he cut my pay. And I looked at him and I said, "Why?" And he said, "Never count anyone else's money. You will be eternally dissatisfied if you count everybody else's money and try and compare yourself to other people that are making more. It's a wasted effort. If you were happy taking the money before and doing the job, then why not now?" So it taught me two things. It taught me to never count anyone else's money. And if I was happy, I should be grateful for what I received. But also, and probably more importantly, this notion of taking care of people,
Mm-hmm.
Stepping in where you felt people needed help because they couldn't otherwise help themselves.
Yes. And you've actually written a book on leadership called Mission Driven Leadership. And you describe yourself as a radical capitalist, saying that, quote, the employees of a company are not a tool of capitalism, end quote. Can you explain what you mean by radical capitalism?
Yeah, I think we often let accounting rules and traditional financial education drive our thinking. I think the proof of that folly was when the Japanese economy started to fall apart in the early 80s, in large part because a lot of their young executives came to the United States to learn about how to run a business.
Mm.
And a shareholder primary model to all exclusion was something that wasn't going to work in the long run and hasn't worked. I mean, we have huge income inequality. And there are two types of economies in our world. There's the wage economy for the vast majority of the population who, for all intents and purposes, until recently, the last year and a half or so, their wages have been not in real time basis flat since 1972. And so if you look at that and you are only on a wage economy, then you've not seen any real growth in your ability to create wealth. And then there's a wealth economy, and those are the people that invest in markets. And you have to ask, if you looked at what people did if they invested in markets since 1972 versus the wage economy, there's been dramatic growth in wealth. And then there was this group in the middle called the middle class that somehow thought they had a wealth asset, and it was called a house. And they could borrow against it, and they could, refinance it, and they could take vacations and buy cars and pay for tuition until 2008, when the market fell apart and people realized that that asset was no longer wealth. It was an anchor. And so a whole group of people fell into the wage economy overnight when the housing market crumbled. Even fewer people were in the wealth economy.
Right.
And so if you think about that as a state of being as a nation, that is not sustainable longer term. So what do you have to do? You have to find ways to, A, properly create earnings growth, real growth, number one. And number two, find a way to allow people to get into the wealth economy. Help them figure out ways to save, provide appropriate financial education. So we did that at Aetna, where in 2015, I raised minimum wage from $12 to $16 an hour. I reduced their out-of-pocket costs for healthcare to zero if they were under 300% of the federal poverty level as a family. And we, on average, increased personal disposable income, or as Ronald Reagan used to call it, walking around money, back in the 80s. We increased that by 27% on average for 7,000 people. And that was a massive change.
And you did that way before it was popular to do that as a CEO. But you weren't, what I found interesting in your story is that you weren't always this like enlightened leader. What were you like in the early days of your career leading people?
I would say, there were people that used to hum the Darth Vader tune when I used to walk through the building because I was exacting. I was a turnaround guy. I fixed broken businesses. My skill is I fix broken businesses and build new ones. If you want somebody to make the trains run on time, I'm not the person. I'm too much scroll. I got to be focused on things that are exciting and interesting. They get my blood flowing versus, watching the trains run on time all day. So, and I always know that. I now know that because I always hire people to do that for me that love it. And I want them to be happy. So, if I can get them to love it, then I'm all that better off as a leader. But, back in those days, I was exacting. I was not, I had, a pedigree MBA. I didn't have a great undergrad education. I had a great undergrad education, School of Hard Knocks, because it took me 8 years to get through school.
And why?
University.
Why did it take you 8 years?
Because I had to work full time. I had to party full time, and then there was school. So And my brother John, who was 11 months behind me and captain of the Wayne State University football team, which was where I went to school, used to say, my brother Mark was a sophomore when I started at Wayne State, and he was still a sophomore when I graduated 4 years later. So,
that's amazing.
But I tell people that's how they knew I was earnest in getting an education, because while it took 8 years, I kept at it. So
that's amazing. And so from there, can you just describe your career arc a little bit and how you developed this kind of ruthless leadership style in the early days?
Yeah. So what happened was I actually got kicked out of school at one point at Wayne State because I was not paying attention. And my grade point average was 1.72 or something like that. And so I went to work at Ford Motor Company in the auto plants. I was doing rear axle differential housing assembly on the Mercury Bobcat. That was my job.
Wow.
And one day I'm looking at my job flow and I'm going, this is crazy. This is too much work doing it this way. So I had the forklift driver come over, move some things around, and made it easier, where I didn't have to work as hard. And I'm, doing that. And the union steward walks by one day and goes, hey, what did you do here? I said, well, I moved stuff around so it's easier. He said, you don't understand. This is a work rule issue. And work rules have to be changed by the union in concert with management. You just can't do that on your own. And I'm standing there in my heavy boots, my coveralls, my earplugs, my earmuffs, my safety glasses, my hard hat, 2 pairs of gloves. And I'm smoking a Marlboro Red, and I'm staring at this guy. And he's standing there in his khaki pants, his white shirt, and his red tie. And I said, how do I get your job?
Right.
And he said, you need a degree, kid. So I went home that night from the plant, and I looked at the Wayne State course book, and I said, okay, here are all the classes I can matriculate. Here are all the classes that I've actually went to I could have passed. And then here are the classes I should never touch again, like organic chemistry. My mother wanted me to be a doctor, and I hated organic chemistry. Those little models that you had to carry around in a bag, I kept losing them all the time. It was just not worth it. So I said then, okay, what classes can I take from there? And I was always a math whiz as a kid. And what could I take from there to graduate the quickest? And it was accounting. No, I am not your typical accountant. Even though I'm introverted, I'm not a typical accountant. And so I said, I took the accounting. I got my grade point up to 3.3. A friend of mine was studying for the GMATs. I was helping with the Barron's book. And he said, you ought to take this exam. You know these better than I do. And so I took the exam for $75. I placed in the top percentile in the country. And all of a sudden I started getting all these offers from graduate schools in business, come on to school here.
Right.
And I went out and visited a number of them and figured I knew some people from Cornell. And I figured, well, at Cornell, they got gorges where you can hang out in the summer, drink beer, smoke a little pot. This is like a cool place to be. So I said, I'm going to go to school here. So
that's how you made the decision.
Yeah. And I think they're the only school that would have me too in the end. But anyway, my wife and I then moved there. Moved in a Plymouth TC3 with the cat in the back.
Wow.
Moved there, lived in a little apartment that had a living room, a bedroom, and the hallway between the two was the kitchen.
Of course.
I graduated, taught my class finance at Cornell, and I was looking at Wall Street and finance, and a friend of mine called me and said, I got $12 million of other people's money. You want to build an HMO? I said, what the hell's an HMO? And he described it to me, sent me the red herring from the U.S. Healthcare Public Offering in 81. I went back to Detroit. It was easy. I took probably a third of the pay I would have otherwise gotten had I gone to work on Wall Street. I always figured I could go back. And we started the company, lost everything in the first 3 years, thought we were out of business, turned it around. And then ultimately I cashed out in 9 years after we started it. The company was $1 billion in revenue and 300 million in valuation. And I went home and retired. I went home and I was hanging around, riding around on a motorcycle, and a recruiter called me, sent by Cy Sternberg from New York Life, and said, they want you to come to New York. And I said, I'm not going to go to New York. And so finally I get a call from Cy Sternberg that said, hey, put together an offer that you think I would refuse and send it to me. So I put together this offer that what would it take to live in New York?
Yep.
I added 25% to it. I sent it to him and on a fax machine. And I had one of those brick phones that you just carry around on your shoulder.
What year is this, Mark?
This is 1992,
Okay.
right? 92, 93. And I'm walking around with this brick phone, the phone, you put it in the back of your car when you get in the car and it would be a car phone. And I'm riding along and the phone rings. I pick it up and they go, "You're hired."
Wow.
And I went, "Shit, I should have asked for more." So I went to New York and worked with New York Life and lived in Manhattan for the first 4 or 5 months. Moved to New Jersey with the family. I had 2 kids by then and lived in Franklin Lakes, New Jersey when it wasn't as posh as it is today. And then we sold it to Aetna. Literally 5 years after I got there. I didn't want to work at Aetna. They had tried to buy my company in Detroit before. I didn't want to have any business dealings with them.
And why not? Why not Aetna?
They were just like this monolithic, bureaucratic, white shirt, tie. You were more like leather jackets and tattoos and motorcycles. Right. I was one of those kind of guys. I didn't want to work for the man. I didn't want to be the man. But ultimately I ended up being the man. And so I then went to work for Cigna for a couple of years. And then my son got sick.
So tell me, you had 2 wake-up calls, and that was one of them. Tell me what happened with your son. He had
a cancer that only 34 people had ever been diagnosed with.
Wow.
All men between the ages of 17 and 34. He was 16.
Wow.
So we took him around and met with doctors, and we had one doctor at Boston Children's Hospital, Ava Guinan, brilliant doctor, and she said, "This is a really horrible disease. It's incurable, but I got an idea. Let's do a bad bone marrow transplant. Let's create graft versus host disease. He has T-cell lymphoma, so the T cells are bad. So graft versus host disease kills T cells, but it also kills people. But if you can survive graft versus host disease, which we can cure, then maybe he'll live." And that was the game plan. So literally moved into his room with him. Harrison's internal medicine text, laptop with PubMed on it. My then wife and I would switch back and forth. But then ultimately I spent all the time there after he got really sick. I spent every night there
at the hospital
and in his room and got up at 2:00 in the morning, make sure the residents did renal dosing right because his kidneys were being compromised by the immunosuppression therapy he was on, checked with the nurses on whatever they put in his 4 IV poles that he had around his bed all the time to make sure it was right. Gave him his bath and all those sorts of things. And on July 15th, I actually called him this last July 15th and said, "Happy birthday." On July 15th, 2002, we put him into hospice.
Wow.
Because he was bleeding out his total body volume of blood every day.
That's crazy.
And my argument with the doctors, and I used to meet with the doctors every morning for an hour.
Yeah.
Take them through all the steps, called it the management process, and they hated me. But I would ask them all these questions, and I'd look it up. I said, "Where can I find that in this book?" And what was happening with Eric is he was starving from the graft versus host disease because his gut was bleeding all the time, and they were trying to cure something else. And so I said, "Well, can't we find a lipid, an intralipid he was allergic to soy, that's not soy based?" And there was this resident there, Tara Henderson. Still keep in touch with her today. And Kara said, I got a professor in nutrition from Hopkins. I'll call him. And this professor said, "Yeah, there's a thing in Austria called Omegaven. It's omega-3 fatty acid based. But it's not FDA approved." So I'm trying to figure out FDA approval. I call the medical director at Cigna. He directs me to the FDA where there's a single patient compassionate use exception. It's a 3-page form on their website. And I had our doctors at Boston Children's talk to them, and we got the drug approved.
Wow.
And we got the drug over to the States, and that we took them out of, and then they said to me, "You can't keep them in hospice if you start giving them drugs for the cure." I said, "Okay, let me think for just a second."
Yeah.
give him the drug, he lives, maybe. Don't do that. Let him die in a nice room.
Yeah.
I think I'll take him into the other room. They said, you have to take him out if you give him that drug. I said, I'm good with that.
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. And so, fast and quick the story forward, that was in early August of 2002. And in February 18th, 2003, he came home.
Wow. That's incredible. So what happened with the drug?
The drug is still not approved by the FDA.
It's still not FDA approved. Wow.
Yeah. And so, but he is the only patient to ever survive his disease.
That's crazy. Wow. That's incredible. And yeah, go ahead.
So it was a year later on February 18th, 2004, to the day of him coming home, that I had my skiing accident and broke my neck.
So then what happened? Yeah. The following year you were skiing and what happened? I
broke my neck. I hit a tree and then I slid head first out into a river and I broke my neck in 5 places, C2, C3, C5, C6, and T1. I pulled my nerve root from my left arm out of my spinal cord, subdural hematoma, crushed my chest on the left, my brachial plexus, and I slid head first down into a river and laid there in the water for 2 hours while they tried to figure out how to get me out without killing me. Medevac me to Dartmouth Hitchcock Hospital. On the way to the hospital, they gave me last rites in the helicopter because they didn't think I was going to make it. And I woke up, 7 days later, and the nurse was giving me a sponge bath, and I went, "What are you doing?" And he went running out of the room, going, "Wait, he's alive, he's awake, he's awake!" And everybody came running in, and the doctor said, "What do you need to know?" And I said, "Well, I obviously had a skiing accident because that's the last thing I remember doing."
So you do remember the actual accident?
No, I don't.
Okay.
What happened was I was skiing, and I looked over my right shoulder, and I hit the tree. So I never knew. I don't remember hitting the tree. I don't remember anything after that. Mm-hmm. And although I've had work myofascial release that has brought some of it back to me, mm-hmm. I've had some work recently done on that. But the amygdala holds all sorts of stuff in there on the right side of your brain from trauma. And the doctor said, "What do you need to know?" I said, "How do I get out of here? Because if I stay here too long, you people will kill me." And so 5 days after waking up, I went home against medical advice.
Wow. And okay, so just paint a picture of, like, first of all, how many painkillers were you on, and what was your mental state at the time after something like this?
I didn't have any pain for like a month and a half.
You did not have pain.
Because I was so traumatized. I mean, I was so banged up. Yeah. And then when everything settled, I was in immense pain. I mean, immense pain. And even until recently, 3 months ago, I was in chronic severe pain every day.
Wow. What would that entail? Oh, sorry. What would that entail?
From my left ear down to my fingertips, it felt like my arm was on fire all day long. Wow. And no matter what position I had it in. And so initially I was on 7 different drugs, mm-hmm. narcotics, including Dilaudid, fentanyl, OxyContin, gabapentin, Neurontin, a whole bunch of drugs. I was like, the whole world was like, when Charlie Brown's mother says something to it, it sounds like wah, 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 wah. That's what my whole world was like. And I was still in pain. The pain didn't go away. And so I was on the verge of hurting myself. I actually was on the side of the freeway in my BMW 740IL.
Wow.
And I had lined up, I had figured it was 2:00 in the morning. I had figured out, I had found a bridge stanchion that was not covered by a guardrail. And I was getting ready to hit the accelerator and hit it at 100 miles an hour or more. And a police car pulled up behind me. So what are you doing here? And I had a neck brace on, I had an arm brace, I was full of narcotics. And I said, "I'm going to kill myself."
my gosh.
And he goes, should you be driving? I said, probably not. So they got me out of the car. They drove the car home, put it in the garage. They took the keys on my license and said, your wife can come and get them tomorrow, but you shouldn't be driving anymore until you're off the drugs. And this is 2004, late 2004. Okay. And I realized that I had to find a way out, and a friend recommended craniosacral therapy.
Okay, what is that?
It's your brain and your spinal column is covered by a dural sheath, a sac, if you will.
Okay.
And the cerebral spinal fluid floats in there, and it floats up and down like a heartbeat. Mm-hmm. That should be in a normal rhythm. And because mine had been damaged pretty badly by all the injury from my neck and my arm, mine was torquing. And so it was creating anxiety. And I wasn't sleeping at all. It was creating anxiety. And so I went to see a craniosacral therapist. And within 3 or 4 months, I was off all my drugs.
Wow.
Yeah.
So at this point in your life, where are you career-wise?
So I had been at Cigna. When my son got sick, I came back. It was a different place. They had been in all sorts of financial trouble. I left.
Okay.
I went to work at Aetna. Ron Williams and Jack Rowe recruited me to come to work at Aetna.
Okay.
They were losing $1 million a day at the time, my kind of situation. And I started working there. But I was working in a small part of the business because I wanted to ease myself back into work and not lose track of my son. Mm-hmm. Then I had my accident. And they were incredibly gracious. I mean, Aetna has a whole group of people that do everything about work ergonomics. So they set up a desk for me, a one-handed keyboard, all this sort of stuff, and allowed me to come back to work because I had learned that my injury was a high, very, like 70, 80% suicide rate. And that, if I didn't get back to work or get busy, I was going to perseverate about my pain and hurt myself.
Wow.
And so I went back to work, got better over time. In the period from 2008 to 2020.
Yeah.
So 12 years, I had 9 different surgeries to try and fix everything. None of which, some helped, but never really worked. Mm-hmm. And the last was a nightmare. I went for a procedure at Mount Sinai West here with a great doctor, Brian Capelli. He's an amazing neurosurgeon, does deep brain surgery. And he opened up my back and put in an electronic system to try and trick my nerve roots into believing they were still connected. And they had to open up my whole back. And I went in and I had a big cerebral spinal fluid leak. So I ended up in ICU. And I was, immobilized for 11 days, flat on my back with a vent out of my back and not knowing what was going on. I went in the first week of March of 2020. Mm-hmm. I took a cab to the hospital.
Wow. And that was?
Just as the pandemic was exploding, right? And so all of a sudden I'm watching the nurses. I'm in the ICU. I'm in a laminar airflow room that protects me. Mm-hmm. And these nurses go from wearing their pink and blue uniforms to these hazmat outfits. And I thought it was me.
Oh, you thought it was you?
I'm all drugged up, stuff like that. What's going on, And my wife couldn't come and visit me because she wasn't allowed. Nobody was allowed in the hospitals. She got thrown out the second time she came to see me.
So you had no idea what was going on outside in the outside world?
Nothing. I mean, I was so drugged up I couldn't even watch TV or use my phone.
Right.
And finally, after 3 more surgeries to stop the leak, they let me out of bed and they walked me around the ICU, and everybody in the ICU was on a ventilator. I said, "What's this?" And they said, "It's the pandemic." And they started telling me the story. I said, "I got to get out of here."
Yeah.
So the next day I signed out against medical advice to go home. Again. And I walk out the front of the hospital. This is at 59th and 59th and 10th Avenue.
Yeah.
I walk out of the hospital and I got my backpack over my shoulder. I'm weak as hell because I've been in bed for so long. And I walk out and I'm looking for a cab, and there is nobody. There are no people. There are no buses.
Yeah.
It was like the world had ended.
I was there during the pandemic too, and it was just a ghost town. There was nothing outside.
And I sit on the curb going, what am I going to do now? I can't walk 30 blocks north. I live on 89th. Can't walk 30 blocks north. I'll never make it. And a gypsy cab pulled up and I said, how much to 89th Avenue? He goes, $20. I said, you're in. I'm in.
Wow. That's how you got home? Wow. So Mark, is there, from all of your experiences inside of like the health care system, is there something that you've learned that is wildly disappointing to someone who worked in the healthcare industry for so long?
It's not a system.
Not a system?
No, not at all. It's a collection of competing economic models by a bunch of cottage industry people. I mean, if you've seen one hospital, you've seen one hospital.
They don't talk to each other.
Physicians work on a cash basis. As long as there's got cash in the bank, they're good. Hospitals work on a revenue basis. If I keep growing my revenue, I'm going to be okay. DMEs, durable medical equipment people, pharmaceutical companies, insurance companies, all run on a margin model. And if you crush all those economic models together, it's war. And the information flow doesn't work. And there's no economic incentive to align. And even inside the hospital, the chief resident changes every 3 days. The regular residents change every 4 days. The nursing staff's changing every day. Yeah. And so there's no coordination around the patient. And so I became the coordinator for my son. I mean, I was the advocate. And I had to stitch together nutrition and, what was going into his IVs and making sure, he had some attention to his social, things. We used to watch Mystery Science Theater 2000, it was back then, with the people sitting down in the front of the theater talking while the B horror movies going on. We would just do all that sort of stuff to keep him active and keep his mind alive, instead of sitting in bed waiting for death.
And why do you think it's so siloed? Can it ever be fixed where it's a system?
If we start organizing it around the patient and their journey. So here's the big idea, and this is why we did the CVS deal. We brought this deal to CVS, Walgreens, and Walmart. And CVS was the one that wanted to do it the most. Still have to deliver on it yet. They haven't done that quite yet. But Karen's in charge now, and I think that'll happen. Patients don't define themselves as an illness. They define themselves by what barriers are created by their illness. I can't walk because of my sugar, things like that. And so we categorize them in the system as a burden of illnesses. We talk about comorbid and multi-diagnostic diagnoses, and we pay and we reimburse the system based on that. Instead of saying, what if we were to say to the patient, what is it about your health that creates a barrier to the life you want to lead? What would that answer be? And so the example I like to use is a diabetic with pedal neuropathy, their feet are numb. You say, what is it about your feet that get in the way of the life you want to lead? Well, I can't walk to the senior center anymore, or I can't take my grandchildren to the park. And if you say to that patient, what if we got your diabetes straightened out so your feet were workable and you could do that again? Would you be into that? Sure, they would. But if you say to them, here's a perfectly healthy individual, and you show them the cover of Men or Women's Fitness magazine, and say, here are the things you need to do, everybody's gonna look at it and go, I'm never gonna be that.
Yeah, it's all about incentives.
Right.
And so after your injury, I found it fascinating that you kind of turned to like Eastern religions and philosophy. How did you discover that, and what led you down that path?
I was a very involved Catholic with my family and the kids, and I was very involved in the church, and I had a scapular around my neck and a rosary in my pocket and a cross around my neck, and I read through the Bible every year. Every night I read something from the Bible, and I was like, I'm a Catholic, I'm going to support the church. And while I was sitting in Eric's hospital room, the thing about Bernard Law and the church in Boston came out.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote a letter to the Archbishop of Hartford, who was actually the pastor in charge of Fall River when all this bad stuff was happening, Archbishop Cronin. And I wrote him a note and said, I understand that there are bad people in the world. We need to find in our heart a level of forgiveness. But what I don't understand is why the institutional church allowed these people to move around.
Right.
Where's the culpability?
Mm-hmm.
And why hasn't the church come up and told everyone around? Now it's a worldwide phenomenon. Why haven't they said, you know what? We were wrong.
Mm.
And I was told in the letter back that it was, a legal issue, none of my business.
Mm.
So I joined Voices of the Faithful, started redirecting money around the church, so that they couldn't take their 6.25% from everything that everybody contributed, to try and put them out of business.
Mm.
And I left my rosary and my scapular on the rail of a church, and I never went to church again.
Wow. That's an incredible story. So then what did you do?
I found like I had a hole in my life. I didn't have a belief system. And so as part of my rehab, I couldn't run like I used to run 4 miles every morning. I was in the gym for 2 hours every morning, pumping iron and doing all this sort of stuff. And I was in great shape. One of the reasons I survived my accident, I was in great physical shape. And my craniosacral therapist said to me, you should try yoga.
I'm sure how that sounded the first time you heard it.
I go, yeah, it was. You should try yoga. I go, yoga's for girls. She goes, oh, no, it's not.
Oh, God.
So she gave me 4 yoga lessons.
Okay.
And she said, after 4 lessons, if you don't think it's effective, then, you can blow me off. Well, after the first one, I was in so much pain from the positions and all that sort of stuff. I was doing yoga, and all of a sudden I said, is there more to this? Is there a spiritual aspect to this? She goes, you have to find that on your own.
Interesting. So she didn't try to kind of convince you.
No. So that's something you have to find on your own. So I read the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, the Prajahidna the tantric texts, all that sort of stuff. And then there was this great book by a guy named I can't even remember his name now, but it's in the book, about relating Western religions to Hindu practices. Because Hinduism, we call it a religion, but it's a way of life. It's a belief system. And it was interesting. I started reading this, and there are 5 yamas and niyamas, 10 between the 2 of them, that are exactly like the 10 Commandments, but written 20,000 years earlier. And so I started reading all of this, and I started getting into the practice of it, and realized that meditation could help me with my pain.
Yeah. And did it?
It did. And one of my mantras is, I have pain. I'm aware of my pain. I am not my pain. It was profound.
When you were doing yoga and meditation, were you still on all the narcotics that you were taking? No.
I was off all of them. And through that process, over time, I got deeper into practice. And in 2007, I walked into the office, and I was the president of the company at the time, and the team's all sitting around the table for a group meeting. I said, we should all have all our employees do yoga and mindfulness. And they all looked at me and said, wow, that's a great idea. However, half an hour after the meeting, the chief medical officer walks into my office and says, that's voodoo medicine, right?
Voodoo medicine.
Yeah.
Okay.
I said, what do you mean? He goes, it's not real. It's not. I said, well, Lonnie Reisman's his name. He's a great guy, great entrepreneur. And I said, well, Lonnie, what would it take? So we got to do a double-blind study.
Okay.
And 3 months later, he comes back into my office and goes, oh my God. The stress levels of employees went down dramatically as a result of these practices. And my yoga teacher, who's now my wife, Mari Arno, an amazing human being, far further along the path than I'll ever be. She helped build the program with a guy named Gary Krasaw, who runs the American Vinny Yoga Institute out of San Francisco, as her teacher. We built a program that was a 12-week program that saw fundamental changes in people's stress levels. The highest level of stress in our organization, the top quintile, those employees were spending $2,500 more a year on healthcare than our average employee population.
Wow.
So, but that wasn't the big finding. The big finding was Mari had all these journals, and she brought the journals home and she put them down in front of me and said, read these, big shot. Understand where all this pain is coming from for these people.
And where was it coming from?
And she points her finger at me and she goes, it's you.
So at this point, you're the CEO.
I'm the CEO, right?
Okay.
She goes, it's you. And so I'm looking at all this stuff and, it's about, working 2 jobs and kids on Medicaid because they can't afford our coverage and food stamps and, how difficult it is, dealing with bill collectors on their break. And I'm going, oh my God. And the company's making money and our stock price has gone from $28.90 when I took over. We're at like $42, $43 a share. Everybody's starting to feel good about it. And I'm going, we're killing people. So I went to the team and I said, we need to raise minimum wage. And then one of the people on the team said, we also need to take care of their health benefits because if we raise their minimum wage, you're going to have to pay more for their health care.
Wow.
And that was just a big moment.
And so, okay, so you implemented that. And then what happened with the employees? Did you notice a difference in the employee base? A
1,200% increase in employee engagement.
And how do you measure that?
It was a survey that we did every year and then quarterly, same 5 questions. Is this a great place to work? Does leadership live the values of the company? Do you feel like you're an important part of the team? Do you believe you have a future? And do we all live our culture? 1,200%.
That's crazy. Mark, do you feel like if you hadn't had the experience that you had with your injury, you would have ever become this like mission-driven leader?
No, it knocked the hell out of me. Those accidents and that journey, the eye-opening nature of it. I like to tell people that I was incredibly well trained and equipped to take over in the healthcare industry at the moment I did because of my experiences. Now, I would not recommend them as a development path, but it worked, and it knocked out all the narcissism. It knocked out that I knew everything. And where before, every night before I go home from work, I get all the material for the next day, even today. And I look at it and I come to conclusions about what I think should be right. And in the beginning, I used to think, how long is it going to take people to come to the answer I know is the right one? And then I used to develop a set of questions to see how many questions do I need to ask before people know it's the right one. And finally, I had a mentor, Ron Williams, my predecessor, say to me, I know your system, Mark, and let me ask you something. If you actually listen to the answers to the questions you asked and develop more questions from the answers you got, maybe you'd learn something.
Right.
And oh my God, today I'm wrong about 60% of the time.
But before, you used to be wrong only 10% of the time.
0, as far as I was concerned.
Yeah. Wow, that's so interesting. And you, so you coined a phrase called the 4 levels of Taoist leadership. Can you explain what that is and how leaders today can use it in their organizations?
Well, it's actually sort of a classification of how so I believe leadership is all about followership.
Okay.
If you get appointed to a job and everybody runs out of the building, you don't have a company. So people always say, well, do you think are you going to promote me? I said, I'm not going to promote you. You're going to do the job before you get it. And I'm going to know by virtue of the people that follow you that you're right for the next job. That's how to build succession, followership. So in the followership model, it's, the first level is that your people hate you. The second level is that they tolerate you.
Okay.
The third level is they like you.
Mm-hmm.
The fourth level is they would do anything for you.
Mm-hmm. And there's this essence of like, but you aim to become an invisible leader almost, right? Like the employee base is so good and they love you so much that they can do the job without you.
Right. And that's what happened after I put the yoga thing and mindfulness thing in place and raised the minimum wage. Everybody said, "Oh my God, we can take care of each other." And all of a sudden the ideas came flooding in. I didn't have any, so we had pet therapy and we had, we were able to bank PTO we weren't going to use for other people that needed it because they were having family hardship. We helped families that were in trouble. Any natural disaster going on in the United States, we would move our employees and their families and their pets out of harm's way so they could continue to be safe. We put critical incident stress debriefing teams on every major disaster, shootings, everything else, regardless of whether or not those people were covered by Aetna. We sent a team.
Yeah.
And where I used to have to ask about it, all of a sudden it just started happening all around me. It was like the most joyful moment when you become invisible because you're not needed to drive it. Your team gets it and does it. It's one of the most rewarding moments of my life.
And you feel like you got there with Aetna.
I did. The only time I had to say no was when they wanted to bring in mini ponies to the pet therapy thing. I said, no mini ponies in the buildings.
that was another trend. That's amazing. So if there is somebody who is you when you are just starting your career and had this kind of like ruthless leadership model, what would you tell that young leader today? Like, what's one piece of advice that you would give them moving forward?
So I'm a country music fan, so there's a Brad Paisley song about this. What would I tell myself and when I was 17? And what I would say to people is you are only as strong as the people around you. So make sure you have the right people around you. That you have to be authentic. You have to be approachable, and you have to be vulnerable in order to be an effective leader. And those three qualities allow people to say things to you that help you.
And earlier this year, you were named co-CEO of Bridgewater, which is the largest hedge fund in the world. How did this role come about, and why did it make sense for somebody like you?
So I always hated hedge funds because when they were in my stock, I hated them because they were always trying to figure out how to get a nickel out of me. And they would chase me into the bathrooms at analyst meetings because they wanted to know just one more piece of information that they could trade on and win. And so, I get a call, Ray Dalio wants to have a drink. So I go meet him. And I'm thinking, why am I doing this? It's a hedge fund. I hate them.
Right.
And he started talking about what his company was about. And one of the more amazing things is that our largest piece of our business is a hedge fund, but our customers keep us because of the insights we give them about the markets and the economy and where the world's headed. That's been Ray's greatest gift. And so we have a philosophy statement that we're going to have pervasive excellence based on radical transparency and an idea meritocracy where nobody has any stripes. And because of that, we'll generate great returns through great relationships with our clients and each other. And that will generate money that we can earn to sustain the company.
And why was that interesting to you?
Well, what was radical transparency, right? And I'm in my first board meeting and I'm sitting there and they're arguing about some conflict of interest thing. And my head's going back and forth. I'm going, oh my God, it's all conflicted. You guys are, owners and partners and blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden we have a system called the DOT system that scores everybody in the meeting. And a big red 4 shows up on my screen from a guy named Jim Haskell, a great guy. And it says, you know more about this than all of us put together. Open your mouth.
So you can send each other messages during the actual meeting.
Right. You get scored every time you open your mouth.
Okay.
And so, I got a 4. It's on 1 to 10 scale, 10 being the highest. I got a 4.
Okay.
That's why it was red. It was a red square around it.
Yeah.
Open your mouth. And the idea of radical transparency is not to be brutally truthful. It's to share your thinking, making your thinking accessible to everybody for 2 reasons. One, you could make an insight into the group that actually matters about how we succeed or not, how we help our clients or not. The second part of it is by sharing your thinking, you get feedback on whether or not you know anything. And you learn.
And that's interesting. So it's fascinating to me because you come from a different world and now you're in like the asset management world. Are there any changes that you aim to implement or hope to implement as a leader at Bridgewater, given your experiences at Aetna and kind of what you've seen so far at the company?
Well, I think when you have an organization that's led by an iconic founder for 40 some years, things like talent development and succession take a back seat. And now that Ray is, is part of a transition of leadership, because I was co-chair before I was co-CEO. Ray asked me to do that a year ago, May, is part of this idea that we now need to be led by a group that builds succession and continuity for the organization intentionally versus being identified by the founder as somebody that's worthy to lead.
And how do you do that?
You have to build all that structure in. And you don't, and in an organization like ours, we've got 1,100 people, 1,200 people. We're trading in 200 liquid markets around the world every day. In a systematic process. The machine does it. And it's all about building the machine right. When you do that, you've got to actually have intentionality around diversity, around the level of talent, about development plans. But when it's a founder at the table saying, here's what we're going to do today and here's what we're going to do tomorrow, there's less of a focus on group learning and management process and those sorts of things. You don't want to break it by making it institutionalized. Right? It's a small company. Everybody knows everybody else. We can pick up the phone. We can walk into our offices. That's what the idea of meritocracy is. It's about the idea, not about your position in the organization. And so this ability to work together collegially, but to still have some formalized processes in the organization that weren't necessarily needed before are the things that we're building.
Interesting. And given that, like a lot of hedge funds are known to be cutthroat and ruthless, like, are you looking to make changes that maybe like yoga and meditation or things like that you did at Aetna? Could that apply here, or is that a completely different business?
It's not, so we're not cutthroat and ruthless. We're not in the business of a lot of other hedge funds, and that's probably the biggest misunderstanding about us as a company.
Okay.
We start at the accounting of how economies work. So we're a bottoms up, we take macro understanding, right? When people purchase things, money gets exchanged. And that all has to equal out across the world economy. And so we start at that basic level and then talk about, nominal versus real and the various markets and how they interplay with one another and how people interact in the marketplace. And so it's that level of understanding about where we see things are. And that's why we've had in the first half of 2022, we've beat everybody in the market with returns because we were zero correlated to a market where both stocks and bonds went down. And that's about our thinking about what happens. And when we talk to our customers, and the reason our clients, I should say clients, when we talk to our clients, and they're some of the biggest clients in the world, when we talk to our clients, we're talking to them about the markets in total, not just about our piece of it.
Got it.
So we'd help them understand how to think about their whole portfolio. And we have a thing called the Daily Wire that goes out every day that everybody reads. And it's about the markets and why the world's changing the way it is. And the time we're in right now, and I'm not at a level of sophistication like our CIOs to talk about it, but the market we're in right now is nothing we've ever seen before.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I want to end on is I feel like these days to be a successful leader, you kind of also have to be a master of chaos to a certain degree. So what advice do you have for young people who are interested in leading large organizations, and how do they grapple with this constant uncertainty?
So uncertainty is the coin of the realm. It's never going to get certain.
Right.
Right. So uncertainty is the coin of the realm, and that you have to lead your organization in a way where you see as many possibilities as possible, but then vector the organization through it in a way that as the world changes, you can maximize your results in any given scenario.
So optionality.
It's not, yeah, it's intentional optionality. Okay. It's not, let's figure it out as we go along. It's okay. We think these futures are possible.
Mm-hmm.
Like the market we're in right now. Stocks and bonds, 60-40 portfolio. They should support one another, right? They should be uncorrelated with one another. But all of a sudden we had two both going down because there's a massive change in the discount rate associated with inflation that we haven't seen since 1982.
Yeah.
Right. And so, what does that model look like?
Mm-hmm.
And even more concerning is as our global economy comes apart and we balkanize our economies and they go to war with one another, what does that mean for liquid markets around the world and the efficiency of our markets?
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to think about all those things, put them on the page and say, okay, in the end analysis, how does this work? And I think that the ability as a leader to sit with uncertainty in your chest or your stomach, wherever you hold it, matters. And you can't be running around with your hair on fire and your hands over your head. You have to lead the organization through it. And if you think change is quick now, just watch. With quantum computing and 5G technology and all these other sorts of things, you've got to be constantly curious about how the world could change and how it'll impact your business.
Absolutely. Wow. And my final question for you is, given all of your experiences so far, what does the word success mean to you?
Impact. I had a friend once say, well, I'll know I'm successful when I have names on buildings. And I suggested that he go to Florence to a church called Santa Croce and walk in the church. And in the big open entryway, your first altar on the right is Michelangelo's tomb. He hand painted it himself. And you go around and there's Raphael and Leonardo da Vinci and all these luminaries of the Illuminati. And they're all buried in his altars. And all of them died penniless.
Yeah.
And then you look at the floor and the Medici are buried there and the Pazzis and all the rich families wanted to be buried in the floor among the Illuminati. Right? And then there's a little red plastic arrow on the middle door of the church. When you walk in, it's embossed with 1964. And that was the year the Arno River flooded. And that was the high water mark of the Arno River. And all the people in the altars, the Illuminati, are safe. And all the people under the floor got washed away.
Wow.
So the Illuminati changed the world, brought us out of the Dark Ages, right? The rich people that lived at that time built the church. They paid a lot of money to be buried in the floor, and they're not there anymore. And so, what's the name on a building? Impact. And so when I always say to people, what I want are my ideas. That's why I wrote the book. Was one to get rid of the experiences it's part of my emptying my amygdala and getting crap out of there. But two, I want to share ideas that people make better. And then I don't want to be remembered for my name. I want to be remembered for the idea. And if the idea does something to change the world and makes it a better place, that will have an impact.
That's awesome.
That's success.
Thank you so much, Mark. That was an amazing conversation. Really appreciate it.
So nice to see you.
Thanks. You too.